Today we're going to start our unit on Rome. Like Greece, this will be a fairly long unit. And right now you're probably wondering, why is there some sort of wolf and why are there children underneath drinking its milk? We'll get to that shortly. In this map, we see the city of Rome. Okay, it's on the Italian peninsula, which juts out into the Mediterranean Sea. And from that city, those humble beginnings, we will eventually see an empire that rises up and they will conquer all the lands that are in purple. We're going to see how they start from that small city in today's class and how they expand. The city of Rome was centrally located on the Italian peninsula. Like we said, the Italian peninsula juts out into the Mediterranean Sea. Italy was protected in the north by the Alps, which was a mountain range, but the lands of Italy have fewer mountains than Greece. The land is less rugged and rocky, and instead is full of fertile land. So the Romans were able to develop an agrarian society, one which is based on farming. When we think of the landscape of Italy, we should think of rolling hills, lots of fertile land, unlike in Greece, which was more mountainous. We have three groups who lived in Italy at the same time. The first group we're going to talk about are the Latins. These are the people who would go on to become the Romans. They built the original settlement of Rome, and they built it atop the Palatine Hill, which was one of the 7 hills by the Tiber River. Of course, you want to build your city next to a river because that will help you to farm. And you build it on a hill because it gives you a better vantage point when defending your city from enemies. The second group are the Etruscans. They lived north of the city of Rome. The Etruscans will give the Romans many new ideas that the Romans will take on as their own. And finally, we have the Greeks. They're our third group. The Greeks established colonies in southern Italy as well as Sicily. And they would go on to influence the Romans with their civilization. Okay, ideas about government, religion, and so forth. So we get cultural diffusion between the Greek civilization with the people of Rome. So looking at Italy, we can see the city of Rome. Okay, it's right next to the Tiber River and it's close to the coast. So that will help with trade. And it's the Latins who live around that area who will go on to found the city of Rome. To the north, in this area up here, we have the Etruscans. And then in southern Italy, right here around the bottom of the boot, and Sicily, we have Greek colonists. Now the other group on this map are the Carthaginians. We can see the city-state of Carthage here. And we know that the Carthaginians were once a Phoenician people. The city of Carthage was a Phoenician colony, a group that we talked about a few units ago. The city of Rome was founded on the Palatine Hill, but over time, the Romans built their city on the 7 hills next to the Tiber River. They had to build on these hills because the lowlands were filled with marshy swamps. You really don't want to build your city on a swamp. One of the big problems with living so close to a swamp is mosquitoes, and mosquitoes carry malaria. So that's a big problem. And early on, the Romans learned how to drain the swamp, and that allowed them to build in a very dense fashion along the Tiber River. The city of Rome was founded in 753 BCE. That's one of those dates you do need to remember. We haven't needed to know many dates. 753 BCE. The founding of Rome is one of them. And the legend says that Rome was founded by two Latin twins, Romulus and Remus. Those are those two boys we saw earlier underneath the she-wolf. These twins came from a royal line from a city called Alba Longa, and they had a family member who wanted to get rid of them so that he could rule. He was afraid that Romulus and Remus would come back and take over this city. The two boys were supposed to have been drowned in the Tiber River, but instead they ended up surviving and were found on the Palatine Hill by a she-wolf. And this she-wolf nurtured them as the boys grew up. They would go on to decide to found a city near the Palatine Hill, but they end up getting into a dispute, and Romulus kills his brother Remus, and that's why the city is named Rome. If it had been the other way around, maybe the city would have been called Rheims. Over time, Rome was eventually controlled and ruled by an Etruscan king. Remember, the Etruscans were the people who lived north of the city of Rome. So an outsider would rule Rome for some time. Here we have baby Romulus and Remus drinking milk from the she-wolf. I've never tried wolf milk. I don't know if that's a thing. If you are in the chat, let us know if you've tried wolf milk, but don't know how that would taste. I'll stick with almond milk. In this picture, we see the Tiber River, and over time the Romans would build on both sides of the Tiber River, and they would create an incredibly dense city. While the Etruscans ruled Rome, they did give the Romans many new ideas. The Etruscans had used a Greek alphabet, and the Romans would pick that up as well and modify it, make it their own. When we think of the Romans, a lot of times we think of gladiator games. The gladiator games were actually from the Etruscans. When an Etruscan noble died, in his will, he would pick two of his slaves and have them fight to the death at his funeral. It was a celebration of sorts. And the Romans would take that idea and, of course, build arenas and coliseums, and it would become entertainment for everybody in the Roman sphere of influence. They come up with the fasces, which is a symbol of power. The Etruscan leader would carry around this axe with a bundle of sticks wrapped around it, and it showed off that he had the power. And this is actually the word that fascism comes from, the idea that one person or party is in charge and has all power. We'll see the Italians use the fasces when they try to restore the glory of Rome around the time of World War II under Benito Mussolini. He said he wanted to create a new Roman Empire. More on Mussolini next year in World History 2, but I will tell you it does not end well for him. Finally, the other contribution that the Etruscans gave to the Romans was the arch. Okay, the arch will allow them to improve the way they construct buildings. More on that later. In 509 BCE, which is not a date that you need to remember, the Romans overthrew the Etruscan king Tarquin the Proud. At that point, the Romans decided that they would never have one person to rule them again. And instead, they would establish a new government called a republic. A republic is a type of democracy, but it's not a direct democracy like the Athenians had used. Instead, in this republic or representative democracy, citizens voted for their leaders, and the leaders would make the laws for the people. So instead of voting on every law directly, you vote for leaders or specialists to make the laws and run the government for you. We have social classes in Roman society, just like any other civilization we've talked about. The powerful landowning nobility were called the patricians. Okay, they held most of the power. I would underline patricians, you'll need to know it. They had the most power, and they were a small group or minority of the people of Rome. The next group were the plebeians. This was the majority of the population. These were your commoners. They were farmers, merchants, traders, and artisans. They were not large landowners. If they owned land, it would be a very small plot. And they had little influence in the early republic. They really didn't have political power early on. Like our other civilizations that we've talked about, they also had slaves. Slaves were conquered people or people who could not pay off their debt. They would be sold into slavery. Like the Athenians, the Romans also had the idea of citizenship. And citizens were limited to patrician men, plebeian men, selected foreigners, non-Romans who had high standing, usually very wealthy. They might be given a role in government. But women, slaves, and most foreigners were not citizens, much like in Athens. The Romans also say that the citizens have responsibilities. They must pay taxes, and they must also participate in the military for a set amount of time. So you had some political power, but on the other hand, you've got to pay your taxes and serve in the military. The government of Rome was a republic, like we said. It was a representative style democracy or an indirect democracy. It was made up of a senate, consuls, and at sometimes even a dictator. But really the ultimate goal of this Roman Republic was to ensure that they never had one person have all the power over the Romans again. They had seen this go bad when they had Etruscan kings, and they said never again. So the first group was the Senate. The Senate was made up of 300 members called senators. Their job was to make the laws for Rome. If you were elected to the Senate, you were a member for life. Patricians were the only citizens who were allowed to become senators. One of their other jobs was to act as advisors to the consuls. Of course, in the United States, part of our legislative branch, our Congress, is the Senate. And of course, our other house of Congress would be the House of Representatives. So we take the name Senate from the Roman Senate. So we've got the Senate in action. They would sit down based on their political party, much like we see today. This guy over here, he must have forgotten to wash his toga, and he's sitting there forever alone. So the Senate acts as the legislative branch, but we also have two consuls. And the consuls act as the executive branch. So it's like having two presidents. The consuls are elected by the Senate, and they only serve 1 year at a time. Before they make any decisions, they must consult each other and the Senate. But their job included running the government and commanding the army. And you could only serve as a consul once every 10 years. So there are some problems to becoming a consul. If you can only serve 1 year, you don't really learn everything that you need in that 1 year to be a good consul. Think about when we elect a president, usually that first year in office is just figuring out how to do the job. And then you can only serve once every 10 years. And that means once you've learned how to do it, well, now you've got to wait a long period of time before you can do it again. But once again, this goes back to make sure that we don't have one person having all the power. That's why there's two of them. We also want to talk about when they would bring a dictator into power. Now, when we think of dictators, we usually think of pretty bad people. Adolf Hitler, Joseph Stalin, Benito Mussolini. Those were the dictators that you'll learn about next year. For the Romans, having a dictator wasn't the worst thing in the world. A dictator would serve in a time of an emergency, like a war or a natural disaster. And a dictator would be chosen by the consuls and then elected by the Senate. A dictator could only serve for 6 months, and they had the absolute power to make any laws and command the army. And that makes sense. In the time of an emergency, you don't want to wait around for the two consuls to come to an agreement and then decide with the Senate if they're allowed to do something. You want one person to be ready to make those decisions. So it better be someone that you trust. One of the most famous early dictators of the Roman Republic was Cincinnatus. We actually have a city named after him, Cincinnati. That's how influential he was. Cincinnatus had been a Roman general, and he had retired and went back to farming. When Rome got into a war with one of their neighbors, they decided they wanted a dictator to run the government, and they trusted Cincinnatus above all else. Cincinnatus left his farm, led the Romans to victory, and even though he could have kept power for himself, and the people might have been okay with it, he said, "I've done my duty, I've helped Rome, now I'm going to return to my farm." And George Washington looked to Cincinnatus as an inspirational figure in his own life. He saw himself as a farmer more than a politician. Over time, the plebeians would demand equality and government reform. One thing that they want are the laws to be written down, and we end up with the 12 tables or 12 tablets. The 12 tables were the written laws, and they were posted in the Roman Forum. This was a meeting place in the center of the city of Rome. By having written laws, it prevented patrician judges from twisting the laws to favor their own class. So when we write the laws down, it helps to end corruption. We will also see the Senate allow the plebeians or commoners to elect their own house in the legislative branch. So the Senate was made up of patricians, and what we get is a tribal assembly, a lower house made up of plebeians. This tribal assembly, like the Senate, can pass laws, and the tribal assembly was given the power to veto the actions of consuls and senators. Veto is a word you will need to know. You've probably heard it before. Veto means to reject. And having that power is going to actually make the tribal assembly very powerful, because they could tell the consuls and senators, no, you're not going to go any further with this law. We don't like it. Over time, plebeians would eventually hold all positions in the government. So they get the equality that they were looking for. Here we have the Roman Forum, or public square. People could go there to conduct business. Government officials would meet here. You can see they use columns like the Greeks. We'll talk more about the architecture later. Here we have the ruins of the Roman Forum. So if you ever get to go to the city of Rome, this is what you would see. Here we have the 12 tables. Does anyone know what language this is written in? Go ahead and post it in the chat if you know. So that language is Latin. And you can actually take Latin at Woodson. Anybody take Latin? Post a thumbs up in the chat if you do. I took Latin in high school, and I don't remember very much. The only thing I really remember is Semper Ube Subube, which means always wear clean underwear. That's about as much of the Latin as I remember. So we have a Senate, and along with the tribal assembly, that makes up the legislative branch. Just like in our Congress, we have a Senate and a House of Representatives. So very similar. For the executive branch, the Romans have two consuls, okay, just like we have a president. The Romans also had a judicial branch. They had judges who were called praetors, who interpreted the laws. And so all these things together gives us the Roman Republic, different branches of government working together. Sometimes these branches share power, and other times they have veto power over one another. The government officials are democratically elected. People vote on the officials to hold office. And these reforms come peacefully. There's no huge violent revolution and sweeping change which takes place. It happens gradually over time as the plebeians are given more power within the government. So the Romans are huge contributors to democracy. The US Constitution takes a lot of those Roman ideas, including the idea of a Senate as part of our legislative branch, veto power, checks on power to make sure that one branch doesn't become stronger than the others, and just the idea of having branches of government. The Romans also give us many ideas on the law system that we use today. The idea that you're innocent until proven guilty. In many civilizations, and even some countries today, you are guilty and then have to prove yourself innocent, which does not sound like a fun time. In 2013, I was actually a juror on a murder trial, and before the proceedings could begin, we actually had to look at the man accused and say that, yeah, we don't know him, and until you can prove otherwise, he is innocent. We'll talk more about that murder trial later on. The moral of the story, though, don't do heroin and don't stab people in the chest. Things generally work out okay if you don't do those two things. But again, more on that trial later. It'll have to do with other court cases we talk about this year. All are equal in the eyes of the law, whether you are rich or poor. You're punished for your actions, not your thoughts. So you actually have to commit a crime, not just think about it, in order to be punished. And they did not have to use war or revolution for the common people to gain power within the government. Okay? So that's going to be it for the first day of Notes on Rome. Plenty more to come though.